Here are the top 10 things I need you to know about for your dementia prevention plan. I'm Dr. Ashanthi Gajaweera. I'm a board-certified neurologist and the founder of Healthspan Neurology, where my mission is for patients to maximize their cognitive longevity and prevent dementia as much as possible. Now remember, I am a doctor, but I am not your doctor. Any information provided here is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Do talk to your own doctor about your personal risk factors and risk modification. But let's get to the most important things I discuss with my patients in terms of modifying their dementia risk factors. Where do these 10 things come from? Well, they come from the Lancet Commission, a really well-reputed multidisciplinary body of work looking at the most robust statistical data for dementia prevention. Now, keep in mind, these are not the only things you can do for dementia prevention. In fact, I would say they're just the tip of the iceberg, but they are so accessible and so important that I really want you to pay attention to each and every one of them. Number one, hypertension or high blood pressure. This is interesting because I think a lot of people take it for granted that, or I take it for granted that everybody realizes how energy greedy the brain is, but it is incredibly energy greedy organ, right? It takes 20% of your body's energy at any time. And it does this by way of its vascular supply. And that vascular supply is carried around by the blood vessels, which are just pipes. And anyone who's done any plumbing knows that if you don't have good pipes, balanced pressure, not too high, not too low, your plumbing fails and the taps don't run. And it's the same thing in your brain. Your brain is incredibly sensitive, but also resilient. And it's so incredibly important to regulate that pressure and not tolerate untreated blood pressure. So I just want to emphasize, if you're going around with high blood pressure and you and your doctor have said, oh, let's just watch it, don't wait. Get your blood pressure addressed. Then readdress what factors might be contributing to it, but don't stall. Number two, high cholesterol. Why high cholesterol? Well, like I said, it goes kind of back to that plumbing story. High cholesterol leads to an increase in plaque buildup or atherosclerosis. And so you just get clogged up pipes, and the narrower the pipes get, the more clogged they get. You just don't get good flow. And if you're not getting good flow, you're not getting energy to this energy greedy brain of yours. Number three, diabetes. And this goes back to that whole energy story as well, because your brain requires really well balanced glucose regulation in order to function properly. In the setting of diabetes or even pre-diabetes, or frankly even pre-diabetes, that system is starting to fail. And when that fails, the brain is working extra hard to regulate that controlled energy delivery. And over time, this stress leads to dementia. Number four, inactivity. Your brain follows where your body goes. And if your body's not moving, guess what? Neither is your brain. Your brain requires the stimulation of activity. In fact, we know that exercise, whether it's aerobic exercise or resistance training, all forms of exercise actually promote chemicals that literally can grow your brain. Yep, it literally produces chemicals that increase new brain cell formation. We can actually see growth on brain imaging. It's incredible. So inactivity is one of the biggest modifiable risk factors. So it's also something you can have control over. So please get moving. Number five, depression. I just said that the brain is this incredibly energetic organ. And frankly, maybe we all know what it feels like to be a little depressed, and maybe even to have outright depression. When you have this feeling, when you have depression, clinical depression in particular, you just don't have the energy supply in your brain that it needs. And when that happens, our synapses are not connecting well. Our neurotransmitters are not flowing as robustly, and inevitably cognition will suffer. Over time, that can lead to dementia. And in fact, studies do show that our risk of dementia is increased in individuals with untreated depression. Number six, social engagement. Your brain depends on stimulus in order to stay active. Without that stimulus, it starts to shut down. And studies show that individuals living in social isolation clearly have an increased risk of dementia. So that's why it's so important, especially as we get older, to expand or increase our social circles, increase our social stimulus, increase our cognitive stimulus. And that brings us to number 7, hearing loss, because this is one that I think we neglect a lot because we just don't want to think about wearing a hearing aid or what it would look like. It makes us look old. Listen, it makes us sound old when we can't hear a conversation. But more importantly, why is this bad for our brains? Because our brain is constantly looking for stimulus. Just like I talked about with exercise, our brain follows the stimulus. And if you can't hear something, if you're missing out on conversation, even if you're not listening to the birds and the wind and the movement around you, you're not getting that stimulus. And it's not to be taken for granted how much real estate is spent in the brain on your auditory cortex. It is tied to not just hearing, but that's tied into memory, learning, processing. It's incredibly important, and our brain is a use it or lose it, energy hungry organ. So don't neglect hearing loss. I think everybody, myself included, should get a hearing check after age 50, already did, and act on it as soon as possible. Number 8, obesity. We know that obesity increases our risk of other problems like hypertension, high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, and inflammation. And we also know that with obesity, we have increased physical inactivity, we have increased social isolation, and even increased risk of depression. So all of that factors in. And I know as a society, we sometimes skirt around the issue of obesity and we don't want to talk about it. But the sake of our brain health, I think it's incredibly important to address as a dementia risk factor. Number 9, brain injury. So our brain is exquisitely sensitive, but yet extraordinarily resilient. And it can take a beating. But here's the thing, once that damage is done, maybe not immediately, but after a while, especially if the damage is repeated, that damage can take a toll. And over time, that can lead to dementia risk. In fact, studies show that recurrent concussion, recurrent trauma, even if it's mild, can lead to an increased dementia risk. Especially in those with a dementia family history, we know that the brain is not as resilient in repair. So this might mean avoiding contact sports or doubling down on the use of helmets, but it's really important to consider and avoid concussion as much as possible. And number 10, which is the last risk factor, which I'm lumping a bunch of things into, but they all have to do what I'm going to call environmental effects of brain injury. And that means these kind of silent things that we don't always think about because they don't feel like injury, but they are. And they may not take their toll until years later once the damage has accumulated. So this is, again, incredibly important, especially if you have a family history, which might mean you don't have a robust repair process in your brain. And these environmental risk factors are as follows. Number 1, alcohol use. Yep, alcohol is a neurotoxin, and I'm afraid no amount is good for your brain. That doesn't mean you can never drink alcohol, but if you have a family history, you may want to review why you drink, how much you drink, and how often. Number 2, air quality. Looking at where you live, your air quality index, and thinking about how to modify that is important for your brain health. Studies show that poor air quality is clearly, very clearly related to an increased risk of dementia. And that might mean moving, but it might also just mean living in a cleaner indoor environment by using an air purification system or just an air filter. Number 3, smoking. We know air quality is related to dementia risk, and we also know that smoking is related to dementia risk. And yes, I'm afraid vaping counts too and is not doing your brain any favors. So there you have it, 10 incredibly important dementia risk factors that we need to think about and that we can at least address and we can identify with and put a label on and say these are things that if we systematically can address, we can improve our dementia risk. And like I said, this is just the tip of the iceberg and represents what has the most rigorous data. In fact, all of what I just listed is from the Lancet Commission and represents multiple randomized control trials and meta-analysis. And if you notice, it didn't even include things like sleep, nutrition, hormonal health, maybe supplements, all of these huge parts of the conversation. And that's why I believe that once we put all of these things together, the majority of dementia cases are preventable. So let's get on it. The point is, all of these 10 things are actionable, and you can start to take action today. They're not that complicated, even if they're not easy. So don't wait until your 60s, 70s, or 80s, and please don't wait until you're having symptoms. Brain changes due to dementia start decades before symptoms begin. And we need to take action as early as possible. Your brain is resilient, but only for so long. My cognitive longevity program is designed to do just that with patients. I work over a course of a year to look at your individual risk factors, track it with data, including the ones that we talked about, but so many more as well. Using advanced data, we can look at the numbers and pay attention to what's important for your brain. And once we know that, we start to chip it away at a time, one at a time, at the risks, and what's right for you may not be right for the next person. If you're interested in learning more, see my bio for the link to Healthspan Neurology, subscribe to my channel, subscribe to my newsletter, and I'd love to have a conversation with you about how you can take the next step to minimize your dementia risk and have the absolute best cognitive longevity program and progress you can.